For Family by Nanook 888. Chapter 15. Restoring the Rule of Two. Mass panic gripped the people of Naboo. Within seconds of the Emperor's unprecedented hollow-vised address, surging waves of terrified Gungans, humans, and numerous minority species were rushing to find any means of escaping the planet, only to find their way barred. Palpatine had flooded in hundreds of legions of clone stormtroopers in anticipation prior to his address, and spaceports had been shut down. Air and space traffic control in all major cities was denying any passage out of the planet's airspace, and even the majority of privately owned docking bays had been blocked off by stormtroopers. Those fortunate enough to get a ship off the ground and into the upper atmosphere found themselves facing a blockade of star destroyers and were bullied back to the surface by a swarm of TIE fighters screaming about overhead. Transport ships carrying whole families were shut down. In their panic, they failed to return to ground. Hundreds of people were trampled underfoot by stampeding crowds or crushed to death as they were caught between the press of people and the walls of stormtroopers forcing them back. Communication lines within, into, and out of the planet were jammed as billions of people attempted to contact all and sunder to bid their farewells. Temples were swarmed by the faithful and non-followers alike, all desperate for a blessing before facing whatever might greet them after death. Wherever they could force their way through the packed streets, people gathered with their nearest and dearest to await their fate together. A minority of miscreants and deviants went on a crime spree, believing that they would suffer no retribution. Queen Calantha's call for calm had little effect on the general population. Rather, it was a personal message by the more popular Puja Naberi, the last senator of the Chomel sector, that managed to reduce the outright panic to simple terror. She called on the Nabooan people to remember the courage shown by the beloved Padme Amidala, and to emulate her strength and dignity in the face of their greatest trial. Princess Leia was a friend and former colleague from the final days of the Senate, and Puja knew that the Rebel Alliance could not be responsible for such a grotesque violation of the most fundamental right of all sentient beings. Her simple petition was to the Galactic Empire, delivered with fierce and unyielding zeal. We of the Gungans and the Naboo have a right to life. I call on Emperor Palpatine to remember his humanity. Remember it, Your Majesty, or you will be reminded. Palpatine eased back in his throne and allowed himself a moment of pleased satisfaction. He was perfectly aware that not everyone would buy his every word, but it mattered none. The official land had been delivered, and the machinations were in place. There was no glimpse of his traitorous apprentice. The bounty hunter must be performing his job well and keeping Vader well occupied in Endor, where he would have no idea of the events transpiring in the rest of the galaxy. Everything was proceeding according to his design. "You may rid yourselves of those clothes," he ordered, waving dismissively. The four guards who had dressed in grubby combat gear for the purpose of the holo recording saluted sharply and marched away, passing by their colleagues in full Red Guard regalia on their way out. Palpatine rose slowly from the throne and ambled across to the floating gurney where Princess Leia lay, still unconscious from the drug administered by Mara Jade. Jade herself was standing beside the gurney and dropped to her knee at his approach. He paid her no heed. He eyed the princess's tidy coil of brown hair in disgust, being reminded of a certain troublesome senator with similar hair, but the recollection soon brought a sneer to his face. Amidala had proven most useful in the end, ensuring that her husband was driven firmly down the dark path and into his hands. Now this princess would also serve to propel the younger Skywalker to descend in his father's footsteps. Mara Jade had made a most convenient observation in Skywalker's reaction to the princess's injury. Whereas the ultimate key to Anakin's downfall had been Amidala, it appeared that the younger Skywalker had two such delightful weaknesses for Palpatine to manipulate: his father and Princess Leia. Palpatine caressed the dark side, basking in its deathly whispers. Luke Skywalker was younger and whole. He would be a powerful Sith, a far more deserving apprentice than the debilitated Darth Vader. It wasn't long now before the young man would begin his journey to the dark side. Sidious could feel the time drawing close. He beheld the image of his new apprentice and experienced a rare buzz of excitement brimming in his black veins. "Come to me, Skywalker. You, like your father, are now mine." A flutter in the Force had his attention zeroing in on the princess. The quiver was only faint, but even a trace of the distinctive energy that reminded him of the fallen Jedi was impossible to mistake for Darth Sidious. His yellow eyes narrowed as he simply looked at her for a moment, trying to gauge this subconscious reaction of fear at his words. He reached out to brush her mind. Shielding? Why would she be shielded? And all at once he saw it. Her likeness to Amidala in her physical features, misguided ideologies, and thorny tenacity in the Senate, the young Skywalker's frantic concern over her, and now this flicker in the Force so reminiscent of Anakin Skywalker. His cackling laughter echoed through the throne room. When his comlink had alerted him to an urgent message waiting for him, Piet hadn't expected to walk into his commander's private holochamber to be greeted by Luke Skywalker. Despite his insistence to Grand Moff Kine earlier to the contrary, there were times when he was taken by surprise, and it seemed to be an increasing occurrence of late. A small part of him still wondered if this rebel pilot and Jedi whom Lord Vader had been hunting relentlessly for the better part of 4 years could really be his commander's son. And yet here he was, Skywalker's calm face and simple robes, lit up in monochrome blue, in the private holochamber of Lord Vader's inner sanctum, that even the most senior officers of the Executor dared not disturb. Piet himself would never have set foot here had it not been for the message's specific directions. Skywalker's holographic form inclined his head politely. Admiral Piet, thank you for coming so quick. I apologize for the abrupt intrusion. Piet was familiar with the endless rules and protocols on how to greet imperial dignitaries and their families depending on their rank and influence, but nothing dictated the proper form of address to the son of Darth Vader. Realizing that he was still standing there in wide-eyed shock, he collected himself and settled on the safest option. He returned a formal bow. Master Jedi, it's no intrusion at all. I am honored to meet you. Please, just call me Luke, Skywalker corrected, looking somewhat embarrassed. Or Commander, if you prefer. But the honor is all mine. I have heard of your invaluable assistance from my father, and I can't thank you enough. Father. Even more so than Lord Vader claiming Skywalker as his son. Nothing hammered home their kinship, like hearing the young man refer to his commander in the same way that Piet was called by his own daughters. There's no need to thank me, he hurried to reassure. I'm glad that Lord Vader gave me the opportunity. After all my years of service, it's a welcome change to finally have a goal I can share. Skywalker's bright eyes regarded him closely. Despite the stark difference between the young man's unassuming manner and Lord Vader's dominant presence, Piet was left with the distinct impression that Skywalker possessed the same powers to read his very soul. Hologram or not, mask or not, it felt very much like he was addressing Lord Vader himself, and Piet's mouth suddenly went dry. What was decidedly unlike speaking to Lord Vader, however, was the small smile that Skywalker gave him. We appreciate it all the same, the young man said, presumably having satisfied himself of Piet's sincerity. Skywalker's expression quickly turned serious. I must admit, Admiral, I'm relieved to see you well. We were concerned for the Executor's safety. Then you did see the Emperor's address, Piet confirmed. The Jedi's calm demeanor had been starting to make him think otherwise. Skywalker's grim frown was his answer. We wouldn't have seen the broadcast had it not been for Boba Fett, Piet supplied. Boba Fett? Skywalker repeated with some surprise. I never thought I would live to see the day when I'd be grateful to the bounty hunter. We had safely boarded the Alliance task force and were set to leave the Kenyan system when Fett contacted Lord Vader and advised us to stay put. He said we should keep an eye on the holonet, that there would be something that Lord Vader would be very interested to see. And my father complied? Just like that? Piet gave a humorless smile. I believe he was convinced when he heard that the Emperor had specifically arranged for the address not to reach the outer and inner Zuma regions. Endor, Skywalker said, understanding the significance. By the time news had reached the Executor and they turned back, Palpatine's schemes would have run their course. Did Fett mention how he came to know this? He admitted to having been employed by the Emperor himself to hire allies and stage a so-called rebel attack on an empty shell of a battle station that was posing as the Death Star to impede the Executor at Endor for as long as possible. Piet's face darkened. The Emperor's address was very revealing. Naboo mustn't suffer the same fate as Alderaan, Skywalker avowed. His jaw twitched. And we will rescue Leia. Somehow, even with such dire prospects, Skywalker's face cleared as if he'd drawn a mask of calm over it. "Could you inform my father that I need to speak with him?" "He didn't contact you?" Piet asked in surprise. He caught himself and hurried to clarify. "Lord Vader tasked me with another assignment and departed the executor. I'm sure he said he would contact you en route." A full second's pause was the only indication of Skywalker's disquiet over this news. Those bright eyes gained a sharp edge, but he still spoke with that same level calm. What that Piet was beginning to suspect was being imposed through great effort rather than any apathy. "Where did my father go, Admiral?" Anakin barely registered the stars streaming past the viewport of his personal shuttle. He simmered in a flurry of the Force, frenetic but controlled, the light and dark swirling in response to his intense emotions. Sidious had his daughter! It was the worst insult, worse than enslaving him, worse than the years of punishment on Bended Knee. There was only one path open to him. He would rescue Leia, and once she was out of harm's way, he would make absolutely sure that Sidious could not pose any harm to his children ever again. It was not a matter of forgiveness or mercy. There was no hope of redemption for Sidious, not a single spark to light the darkness. He was too dangerous to be left alive. Anakin shut his eyes against those words haunting him from the depths of his memories, from a time before the name Darth Vader had been dredged from the dark side. Master Windu had been right all along. If only Anakin had listened, if only Palpatine had been killed in the Chancellor's office. Anakin snapped his eyes open. It was time for action, not wishful thinking. Leia needed him, and whether she welcomed his help or not, she was about to get it. Mace Windu. Was it true? They had never bothered with greetings, but even for Boba Fett, it had been an abrupt opening question. Anakin had known instantly that the bounty hunter was referring to their brief exchange on Geonosis, and Anakin had reluctantly confirmed it. After several moments of simply glaring at him, and just when Anakin had been about to question Fett's strange behavior, the bounty hunter had pointed him to the HoloNet. Not that he was any clearer as to the motivation behind Fett's tip-off, but Anakin wasn't about to question it. The prospect of still being in the dark left him cold. The Force urged him to hurry. If Palpatine was to discover that Leia was his daughter, the danger to her didn't bear thinking about. Would he ever see his son again? Anakin wondered wistfully. Luke, who had listened to his story, who had forgiven him wholeheartedly, who had redeemed him from the dark side. Surely Luke would have tried to contact him by now and discovered that his father was no longer aboard the Executor. Anakin prayed that the boy would understand. Even knowing that he had a better chance of saving Leia with Luke's help, he couldn't bring himself to call his son to the Death Star. To improve the chances of saving one child was one thing, but to actively endanger his other child in the process. As a father, it was nothing short of impossible. The cockpit door hissed open, snapping Anakin out of his ruminations. In an instant, he was challenging the intruder, his blood-red lightsaber at the man's neck. Solo? Han froze on the spot, unable to tear his eyes from the deadly blade, humming just below his chin. Anakin growled to himself as he jerked the lightsaber away and killed the blade. He must have been well and truly lost in his thoughts not to have noticed that he was not alone aboard the ship. Now that he paid more attention, he realized that not only was the Wookiee hovering behind Solo, but the rest of the Alliance task force that they had picked up in the Kinyan system was in the passenger cabin. He cursed himself for his blindness. Han might have been genuinely fearful for his own life for a moment, but it didn't take long for his bluster to return. Hey, watch what you're doing with that thing. You almost did some serious damage. Anakin's own temper was running high. What are you doing here? He demanded. Han threw his arm out in what he reckoned was the rough direction of Naboo. Going to rescue Leia, of course. Uncertainty suddenly clouded over his face. That is where you're going, isn't it? Anakin's brows climbed towards his hairline in disbelief. You are going to rescue the princess. Chewie loped into the cockpit. He slid past Han and folded himself into the co-pilot's seat, ignoring them both. Yeah, well, it wasn't like we could miss your little chat with Boba Fett. You'd stuffed us in the next room in your quarters, remember? Han wasn't after an answer, and he quickly reverted to his more important question. So, are you going to Naboo or not? Because if you're not, you're going to have to deposit us somewhere we can catch another ship pretty quick. Yes, but Anakin shook his head. You would risk your own life to storm the Death Star and save the princess from Palpatine. That pretty much sums it up. Yeah, I'm confirmed. Cheerful night. The Alliance would be trying to destroy the Death Star. Anakin pressed, convinced that Solo wouldn't have thought that far ahead. They won't wait for you to be clear. Han surprised him with a cocky grin. Great! Poor odds. Happens to be our specialty. Palpatine is powerful. You'd be marching straight into hell. Been there once or twice, Han said casually. Anakin was still in a state of disbelief. Why? I could ask you the same thing, Han countered, not wanting to reveal anything personal to the overgrown cyborg, assuming, of course, that there was anything human about him at all. Anakin clutched for some credible explanation. The galaxy needs her, he managed to say. Yes, that was perfectly reasonable. She is crucial for restoration after Palpatine's demise. Why would you risk everything to save her? He threw back. Geonosis, Han replied lightly. I owe her one. It wasn't the real motivator, but it wasn't untrue either. He wasn't tempted to learn how Vader handled being fed outright lies. Right at that moment, Anakin couldn't have cared less. He was too busy being utterly amazed, having espied a complete stranger lurking behind the scruffy appearance, jutting jaw, and blasé attitude. It was as the saying went, actions speak louder than words, and they were certainly shouting at him now. A far cry from the self-serving smuggler Anakin had always thought him to be. It suddenly struck him that he didn't know this man at all. It remained to be seen whether Solo followed through on this honorable objective. But right then and there, Anakin couldn't fault the man's loyalty. Perhaps his son was right after all. The far corners of Anakin's lips edged upwards. We'll be arriving in the Chalmel sector shortly. I trust you can take us in, General. Yeah, sure, Han drawled. We've got it covered. With a nod, Anakin departed in search of the only quiet corner left on the small ship that had suddenly become rather overcrowded, grateful for the first time in his life for the hyperbaric chamber he'd had installed on his personal shuttle. As soon as the door shut off the hiss of that infernal respirator, Han practically fell into the pilot seat. Thanks for watching my back there, pal. He stared sarcastically, more than a little wounded that he'd have to fend off Vader by himself. Chewie's reply was perfectly unconcerned. He wouldn't have done anything. Han threw a disbelieving glance at the Wookiee. Are you blind? He did do something. He almost chopped this gorgeous head off my shoulders. We surprised him, that's all, Chewie bade back. We surprised him, Han echoed, increasingly flabbergasted at the rubbish Chewie was spewing. Maybe we should have got your head checked out on Paulus Massa. You're very trusting in Vader all of a sudden. He shook his head and muttered, You and Luke both. This cockpit's giving me shoulder cramps. Did they realize that not everyone's vertically challenged? And so was the end of that conversation, by the looks of things. Han knew that when Chewie decided to seal his lips on the subject, there was more chance of beating the furry oaf at arm wrestling than squeezing in any more information until the Wookiee felt good and ready. Han sighed in resignation. No, I don't think the Empire had Wookiees in mind when they designed her, Chewie. Mara Jade jabbed the needle none too gently into the bulging vein, but the unconscious princess didn't even wince. She drew a small vial of blood before withdrawing the needle. Deliver it to the medics. The Emperor snapped impatiently as she swiped the coagulating swab over the puncture and tugged the sleeve back down. Keep the sample and results completely secure, and do not keep me waiting. Yes, Master. Mara bowed and hurried away from the throne room. The first thing she registered was the smell. Stale and artificial, with a hint of something putrid that clung to the back of her throat, making her want to gag. She suppressed the reflex out of habit, a regimented control garnered over her entire life to demonstrate poise and refinement at all times. And then came the sticky, malevolent darkness. It corroded her from all sides, a glutinous murk that left a trail of toxic sludge as it slithered over her skin and pressed on her mind, leaving her shuddering in revulsion. At last, Hughes. There was no mistaking that gravelly voice. A perfect complement to the sickly darkness. It clawed down her spine and chilled her to the bone. Gathering as much courage and grace as she could, like a protective shield, Leia sat herself up and turned regally towards the voice. There was the Emperor, draped in his customary plain dark robes, with his ghostly white hands resting on the arms of the throne. His scarred white face almost glowed from the shadows of his hood. The last time she had seen him in person had been in the crowded Senate arena. Here, in the privacy of what was clearly one of his throne rooms, there was no sign of the magnanimous public facade. Those yellow eyes from Luke's Force vision leapt out at her, regarding her with predatory greed. She was a mere 10 paces from the Sith Master upon his throne. A rush of fear left an excess dose of adrenaline coursing through her veins. Fear not, princess. You will soon be reborn, stronger and wiser. He couldn't mean... She hurriedly checked her mental shields as Luke had taught her. They were still intact, with no signs of Palpatine having slipped past. That was a small measure of relief, at least. She bought herself a few precious seconds to collect herself as she swung her legs off the gurney and carefully planted her feet. The last thing she remembered was a sharp prick on her neck before the world had gone dark. "Leave us," he snapped as Leia righted herself. The red guards fanned about the room, silently slipped away. The sense of emptiness, of deathliness in the dim room increased. Somehow, knowing that the two of them were alone was much more sinister than if there had been another 10 elite guards to fight. There was only one way to respond to such a threat. Leia set her jaw. "Emperor Palpatine," she greeted with a defiant edge in her voice. "I hadn't expected you to make such a grave mistake. When the galaxy learns that you have resorted to kidnapping and threatening a member of the royal house of Alderaan..." "On the contrary, princess," Palpatine interrupted pleasantly. "The galaxy believes that you have abducted me. They are united in the outrage against the Rebel Alliance." "That's absurd. Why wouldn't I abduct you and hold you aboard an Imperial vessel?" "Come, see for yourself." A pale hand waved at the webbed window behind him. Something was very wrong here. Palpatine looked too exceedingly pleased with himself. He either had something dire hidden up his sleeve, or he was a fool. Unfortunately for her, he was no fool. Unable to refuse, she warily edged around the throne. She realized there was nothing hidden up his sleeves. It was right there before her very eyes, floating some distance away and yet still close enough to dominate the viewport. "Naboo." Dread thundered through her. Palpatine's eerily congenial voice sounded behind her. "Lord Vader was seeking the Death Star on behalf of the rebellion, wasn't he?" She kept her back turned. Didn't trust herself to speak. "I must congratulate you," he continued leisurely, "for finding it first." Now she did turn. Her gaze landed on him, registered his twisted satisfaction before flickering around the throne room. "The Death Star?" The scars on his face deepened as he grinned. "Welcome aboard, Princess Leia." Gunships, star cruisers, battleships, frigates, and bombers of all descriptions, including Mon Calamari, Alderaanian, Corellian, Seleucian, and Casselian. Lando guided the Millennium Falcon in a smooth arc around the scores of assembled ships, keeping a wide berth of the numerous starfighters zigzagging in between them. To think that this was only the secondary division, and all largely thanks to Vader. Lando whistled. His co-pilot, Niam Numb, the Celestian smuggler whom Lando had befriended in the past, peeled off in his rolling speech. "Yes, so it's impressive. Just don't forget who has the Death Star." Lando was undeterred. Partly to himself, he reassured, "We brought it down once before, we could do it again." The Battle of Yavin was before his time, but he still spoke in terms of we. The Empire hadn't been good for business, and for the time being, he associated himself as part of the Alliance. Besides, being a general was bound to have a certain appeal with the ladies. He checked the computer and flicked the comm unit. "Admiral, we're in position. All fighters accounted for." "Acknowledged, General Carvision," came Akbar's response from his own command position. "The primary fleet is assembled at Dargul. We are moving into attack formation and will proceed with the countdown." "Are you sure about this?" Lando couldn't help asking one last time. "High Commander, General. Commander Skywalker also concurred. We cannot delay. Hold position at Arbra and await my signal." "Copy that, Admiral," Lando confirmed before switching up the comm. He sighed and shook his head. "I sure hope Luke knows what he's doing." "Any bets on where we are?" Maze muttered aside to his friend, eyeing the general seated up in front before glancing uneasily around the passenger cabin of the settled Idarium. Medine had not been the least pleased when, only minutes after he had rendezvoused with the Imperial shuttle, Skywalker had suddenly announced an unscheduled detour. Not only had the commander failed to mention such an excursion during the Alliance's rushed reorganization following the Emperor's hollow message, but other than stating that he needed to pick something up, he had since refused to divulge where, or what, or why. And worse, he had bundled them all in the passenger cabin to conceal their whereabouts, with R2 refusing them entry into the cockpit. Wouldn't even know where to start, Tran replied equally quietly, absent-mindedly flicking the cover flap of the in-cabin temperature control back and forth. So much turbulence when we were landing might narrow it down some, but we could be anywhere, and I didn't ask. In front of them, Medine maintained his stony silence. If he heard them, he gave no indication. I know what you mean, I didn't either. I couldn't... Still with his head resting on the backrest, Maze shook his head. It's not normal, I tell you. He must be peeved, but he doesn't look it. He's almost like his usual self, as if it's just another ordinary day in the rebellion. I reckon it's his Jedi powers, Tran volunteered. Course it's his Jedi powers, Maze replied in a hushed whisper. I only said it's not normal. They fell silent again. The shuttle's engines hummed faintly, the only indication of life outside the passenger cabin they'd been locked into. After a while, Tran glanced up as a thought occurred to him. Actually, we're lucky that he is. Maze had already forgotten what they'd been talking about. What? You saw him on Geonosis. Can you imagine if he was freakishly angry now instead of freakishly calm? A beep and a hiss of depressurizing air were the only warnings they had before the ramp slid open. They were hit by a wall of damp air thick with the scent of vegetation, and managed to catch a glimpse of some marshy ground outside the ship before their view was blocked by a large green metal container. It was roughly cube-shaped, about as high as from their knees to their shoulders, hovering on repulsors as Luke guided it into the ship. The ramp closed behind him, seemingly of its own accord. Medine leapt to his feet. Commander Skywalker, explain yourself. Tran, can you secure this between those seats? Luke asked, as if oblivious to the general's ire. Yes, sir. Tran hopped up and scooted it towards the back of the cabin. What is it? Is it a bomb? Maze guessed. It looks like a secure military weapons case. Luke smiled faintly. You kids say that, but don't worry, it won't go off if you don't aggravate it. Medine deliberately stepped in front of Luke, barring his way. Skywalker, this is an order. You will explain yourself at once, or I'll be forced to court-martial you for insubordination. Maze suddenly found himself very eager to help Tran. Heads down, they busied themselves with securing the cargo with infinite care as they watched the confrontation out of the corner of their eyes. Luke turned to the red-faced general with perfect composure. I appreciate your concern, General, but you understand that I wouldn't allow anything to jeopardize our chances of saving Leia or Naboo. Yes, that's perfectly understood, Medine replied irritably. Nobody's questioning that, but then you'll have to trust me. Madine's jaw opened and closed several times in astonishment. Skywalker's voice and demeanor were very soothing, and eventually the General's brow settled in unhappy resignation. Don't make me regret this, Commander. Jedi or not, you'll bear the responsibility if you endanger our mission. Skywalker's reply was as hard as steel. I'm well aware, sir. Without waiting to be dismissed, he stepped around Medine and headed towards the cockpit, the door that Medine had tried and failed to pry open, releasing easily with a wave of his hand. R2, are we set? The door closed on the droid's responding trill of bleeps, leaving Medine glaring after him. You know, he's alright, sir. Medine and Maze both glanced in surprise at the quiet words from Tran. It took Medine a few seconds, but he eventually got the message. He's not the enemy. A touch of regret made him glance once more at the closed door before he looked back at the young Corellian. There was a head on those slight shoulders, Medine acknowledged. Perhaps it was shooting the princess that had made him wake up and take stock. His lanky friend, on the other hand, was just as happy-go-lucky as when he'd sent them to Geonosis. Get some rest, Medine told them gruffly. Yes, sir, Maze replied cheerfully and scooted down in his seat. He was always up for Kip. With a rather more somber air, Tran returned his attention to the loose control flap. Leia's breath hitched. The Death Star was orbiting Naboo, with the Emperor on board. Alderaan flashed into mind the threat to Naboo, screamed out at her. The Emperor sat, seemingly helplessly, on the throne. She was only a few steps away. Her weapons had been removed, but she still had her hands. Could she reach him? She saw the white flesh of his neck, just a small glimpse revealed in the V of his cowl, but enough to locate his windpipe taking. Through lidded eyes, Palpatine followed her every flickering glance. "You feel it, don't you?" came his contented observation. She started. What had come over her? Had she really been about to strangle Palpatine? But of course, what she wouldn't do to prevent the repeat of such terrible destruction. "The dark side is there for the taking. You need only to embrace it." The dark side? What did that have anything to do with stopping Palpatine? She felt the answer almost as soon as she'd asked it. His malignant energy continued to slither around her, open and available, beckoning and potent. Was that what she had been tapping into? Was it influencing her thoughts? Leia took a physical step away from him. "The Force has nothing to do with me," she insisted, desperate for a reprieve, wanting to be sure that her thoughts were her own. "You mistake me for Luke." "Oh, yes, the boy. He will be here soon." Perceiving her fear for the young Jedi's safety, his smile broadened. "Your father was wise to hide you from me." Her pulse jackknifed. Did he know? Which father did he mean? She could hardly ask. It would only alert him if he was in ignorance. "It is very simple," Palpatine informed her, his tone disturbingly sympathetic. "Use the dark side, destroy me, and you will save Naboo." Steadying herself against the constant assault of his dark energy, struggling to discern her own thoughts amidst his goading, Leia had never felt so confused. The fate of Naboo clamored out to her, but the distinction between right and wrong that was usually so clear to her was clouded from view. Was this how Vader had envisaged Palpatine turning Luke to the dark side? She had never imagined how much of an effect a few words and the dark force could have on her. The longer she stayed, the more she feared she might succumb. She sought escape. There were 2 sets of stairs leading down from the dais, an empty stretch of polished floor, then a bridge leading to an elevator tower that rose up from an immense open shaft. From the hollow hum resonating from it, she guessed that it dropped all the way to the reactor core at the heart of the battle station. If she could only reach that elevator. "You are only here as my guest, Princess," Palpatine said. "You are perfectly free to leave, if that is your wish." There it was again, words balanced on a knife edge, designed only to bewilder her. "I don't believe her. I don't believe you," she said outright. They were long past the time for diplomacy. "Nobody will stop you," he assured her. Then he grinned. "There is just one consequence." Palpatine raised a hand, indicating the aqua-green planet suspended behind him. The shield operator stared avidly as the 3 Star Destroyers crept their way across the screen in a formation. It was identical in every way to the 99 other slow-motion passes they had already made, but his eyes tracked their pedestrian progress as if it was the most fascinating thing in the galaxy, with the Supreme Ruler himself on board the battle station. Nobody was slacking. A new blip suddenly appeared on the operator's scopes. The view screen informed him that it was a Lambda-class shuttle that had dropped out of hyperspace and was on direct course for the Death Star. He watched it nervously, praying it wouldn't arrive in his designated section of space and increase his margin for error. No such luck. His flashing monitor notified him that communication from the shuttle was feeding into his headset. Command station, this is ST-321. The shield operator frowned. Who was this clown? Code clearance blue, deactivate the security shield for docking in Primary Bay 1. Unfamiliar with the commune designation, the operator would have ordered the incompetent fool shut down immediately. But the nonchalant demand to dock in the hangar that was being held in a state of perpetual readiness for none other than the Emperor himself gave him pause. He stuck to standard operating procedures. Deflector shield activation and docking clearance will proceed when we have confirmation of your code transmission. Stand by. The computer registered and approved the ranking codes in a matter of moments. The operator took one look at the readout and almost suffered a cardiac arrest. "Sir!" he called to his superior. The control officer stepped over, glanced at the screen, and blanched. "Learn immediately!" "Yes, sir!" the operator confirmed before relaying the clearance into his comlink. The officer had already turned urgently to his assistant. "Inform the commander that Lord Vader's shuttle has arrived." "They can handle it," Han insisted. "We can handle it," X2 confirmed, the sole collected voice in this heated debate. Or at least one side was heated. The other side just rumbled like a booming cannon. "They
On 9, the Death Star has entire legions at its disposal.
And they'll fit right in. Otherwise, what's the point of all this? Han demanded, spreading his arms wide to indicate his entire self. Fitted out in the uncomfortably smart black gear of Imperial Special Ops, the Rebel Strike team looked halfway decent. Anakin was sorely tempted to treat them all to a one-time only offer of a haircut with his lightsaber, but he didn't have the time to argue. X2, who had been appointed second in command of the small squad, and the other 8 rebel soldiers looked from Vader to Han. Not sure which was more amazing. That Solo was arguing with Vader, or that nobody was choking yet.
It is perfectly possible that someone would see through the disguise,
Anakin reasoned, eyeing their long hair peeking out from under their helmets. Exactly, and with Chewie standing out a mile, that becomes even more likely, so they should go without us.
My special agents can be any species, Solo, and if they are detected, you and the Wookiee being present would greatly improve their chances.
Han glowered back at Vader, not giving an inch. Anakin huffed in frustration. Didn't Solo understand?
If we cannot commandeer this battle station, either Palpatine will destroy Naboo, or the Alliance will destroy the Death Star with the Princess on board. Is that what you want?
The Imps are generating a deflector shield from inside. Rebel ships are hardly likely to get through. Anakin tilted his helmet.
And where will that leave Naboo?
Han was clearly torn. Of course, they couldn't just leave Naboo to be blown into space dust, but he also had a desperate, unshakable need to go after Leia. He really didn't have time for this. The Force was practically tugging Anakin out of the shuttle. Heaving a mighty sigh, he settled on a compromise.
If you will insist on fighting the Emperor, go and take over the command sector first, then come and assist me.
He leaned into Solo's face.
Deal.
Already playing host to the Supreme Galactic Ruler didn't make it any less terrifying to now be personally welcoming the Dark Lord. Jojarad had no idea what he had done to deserve 2 such distinguished visits in the space of 1 short day. Secretly, he hoped he wouldn't be quite so fortunate in the future. He marched smartly down the assembled rows of stormtroopers towards Lord Vader's personal shuttle, in no small part relieved to have been able to summon a platoon to be in attendance when the majority of troops were on special guard detail. Jojarad was under no illusions that his position as commander of the Empire's most powerful weapon safeguarded him in any way. If he should take but one wrong step, causing offense with a poor reception was hardly likely to put him in Lord Vader's good graces. The Dark Lord seemed to take an age emerging from the shuttle. Jojarad stood at attention, not daring to relax his stance. As the seconds passed into minutes, he began to fret. He'd rushed out here as soon as he'd received word of the distinguished arrival without even pausing to alert the Emperor, but he became increasingly panicked that he ought to have taken the time to do so. According to the Emperor, Lord Vader ought to have been engaged elsewhere as part of the same platoons near the Alliance, functioning freely under the MIA cover story. What if there had been some unforeseen glitch in the plan? At length, the shuttle finally released a great hiss of air and the exit ramp gaped open. The mechanical breathing resonated from the dark interior, cutting through the tension in the hangar before the armored Dark Lord descended. Jojarad bowed his head. Lord Vader, this is an unexpected pleasure. We are honored by your presence. Vader didn't respond immediately. The deathly black mask regarded him, and Jojarad visibly shivered as an icy touch ran through him. He felt as if he had just been scanned from head to toe and right through his very thoughts.
You may dispense with the pleasantries, Commander,
Vader finally replied.
I come only to attend the Emperor.
Jojarad almost sighed in relief. At least the 2 heavies in the same place would be easier to keep track of.
I will alert His Majesty at once, my lord.
A great black-gloved hand waved him off.
A redundant use of time. See to my agent, he has my orders. Ensure that he has your every assistance,
Vader ordered with a threatening finger in his face.
Commander.
Yes, my lord, of course. Jojarad bowed again as Vader marched away, his cape billowing in his wake. Jojarad glanced around, wondering what agent the Dark Lord had meant exactly. That was when he caught sight of the small group clustered around the foot of the ramp and identified them as Imperial Special Ops from their attire. Except for the Wookiee, that is, who towered head and shoulders above the rest. Jojarad did a double take. Wookiee? Didn't the Empire usually use them as slave labor? Are you gonna keep us waiting all day? Irritation at being addressed in such a manner quickly helped Jojarad to recover from his initial surprise. He rounded on the sullen-looking man, taking in the casual stance that even the smart combat jacket couldn't improve. Was there something familiar about him? Jar Jar didn't pursue that thought. Far be it from him to question what kind of man the Dark Lord employed as an agent, but he didn't have to take any disrespect. All the resources that you require to carry out Lord Vader's orders are at your disposal, but I hold rank here, and you will follow standard protocol in addressing a senior officer. To his shock, the disrespectful agent simply snapped right back in his face. Look here, Commander. Vader doesn't keep me around to bootlick pompous bureaucrats like you. I get the job done, and I do it my way, and I tell him straight up how I see things. You want me to give him a nice report about how you held up his orders because you were preaching protocol? Do you? Huh? Well, seeing as you put it that way. What do you need, Agent? Olos, the man supplied grudgingly into the lingering gap. I'm Agent Olos. Jar Jar stared. Did the man just roll his eyes? To the command sector, Agent Olos snapped. On the double, Commander. Jar Jar set his jaw. Refusing flat out was out of the question, but he didn't have to attend to it personally. He gestured over a gray uniformed junior officer. Escort Agent Olos to the command sector, Ensign. Inform Colonel Dyer to cooperate fully with Lord Vader's agent. Use him! The young officer snapped a sharp salute to Jar Jar before turning to the special agent. This way, Agent Olos. Jar Jar nodded in approval at the smart young officer as the special ops team was led away. Perhaps he ought to promote the young man when things had all calmed down again. Is it morbid fascination that draws you, Princess? Leia had no idea what warped logic Palpatine was now conjuring. She wasn't about to prompt him to invite more of his manipulations, but he clarified for her anyway. You were the most persistent witness to the Empire's demonstration of its power. Alderaan destroyed by the first Death Star, and now Naboo to be destroyed by the second. It appears that you can't keep away. No. There's no two ways about it. If you will not leave, and you will not kill me, then you will be perfectly positioned to bear witness when the designated time comes. She shook her head. There was hope, even if it was a hope steeped in fear. We will stop you. Luke will stop you. He smirked. Of course he will. I'm counting on it. The shifting whispers of darkness around them intensified, responding to Palpatine's eager anticipation. Only through the power of the dark side can young Skywalker hope to defeat me, and that will secure his future as my apprentice. Luke... Panic piled on top of her fear. The only question, he continued silkily, is whether you intend to use up his chance. She struggled with her composure. This has nothing to do with me. Icy air rippled around her, and over her skin she recoiled. He grinned. You shield yourself well for being untrained, but you cannot hide from me. The Force is with you, and you have great capacity for fear. She was shaking her head, but bleak realization was setting in. He knew. Worthy apprentices are so rare. It's exceptional indeed to be presented with a choice. Who will prove stronger, I wonder? More hungry for power. He was practically salivating at the prospect. It is fitting for the father to step aside so his child can take his place. My father is gone, Palpatine, Leia insisted. He gave her a hideous display of his teeth. The Jedi who fathered you is certainly dead. He sealed his own grave with his first deed as my servant, slaughtering the younglings at the Jedi Temple. But Lord Vader is still very much alive. Vader had massacred children? She didn't want to believe it, but the Force resonated with a hideous sense of truth. Vader isn't my father, she croaked in one last desperate bid at denial. His mood turned foul. Save yourself the lies, Princess. A blood test is being performed as we speak. There will be no denying the results. I assure you, by the end of this day, either you or your Jedi brother will submit to my will. That small patch of sallow skin under his chin caught her eye again. The idea of strangling the Galactic Emperor with her bare hands seemed utterly ludicrous, but in order to save Luke and Naboo and herself, she was out of options. The desire to snuff out that repulsive life grew. It would be so easy. Her hands twitched, her legs tensed to carry her forwards. The Force fluttered. Her vision phased and altered. Palpatine in the dim throne room faded away. All she could see was Luke standing over her, infinite heartbreak watering his eyes as he swung his green blade straight down over her. Horrified, she brought up her hands in defense. A prickling sensation ran down her arms, fizzy as if her very blood boiled, and then blue lightning erupted from her fingertips. The image vanished as quickly as it had begun. Reality rushed back. A Force vision? Here? Now? Its message dawned on her. As the attempt would turn Luke to the dark side, so would it turn her. She wrenched herself backwards away from Palpatine and his slithering dark energy, her breath shuddering, terrified at how close she had been. Her gaze snapped up, only to be met by gleaming yellow eyes. Palpatine didn't seem to be the least upset that she hadn't succumbed. "Twice tempted, twice refrained," he purred. "With each passing moment you make yourself more my servant." Irrefutably, categorically, no. Or she strangled him just to prove him wrong. The spiraling pressure shattered like glass. They both felt it, a Force presence so potent that it was almost tactile, an abrupt manifestation in the vicinity of the elevator shaft as it drew back its concealment and revealed itself out of nowhere. Mesmerized, her gaze was drawn to the doors at the far end of the throne room as the rising bars of red light indicated its approach. After a pregnant pause that seemed reluctant to pass, the doors finally parted to reveal the uninvited arrival. The mechanical hiss of the respirator breathed in and out. Then Vader stepped out of the lift. The shield operator watched in dismay as an unexpected blip appeared on his scopes. "Sir," he began, but forgot to finish the sentence as another blipped, and another quickly appeared. "Sir," his view screen went crazy. A flurry of blips appeared, ranging in size from tiny starfighter-sized dots to those comparable with Star Destroyers. "Sir!" He wasn't alone. All along the banks of panels in the traffic control room, operators called out to the control officer. Computers analyzed the ship's overrode manual control and sounded the alarm throughout the battle station. Red lights started flashing as a mechanical voice sounded over the intercom. "Priority fleet alert. Rebel fleet in attack range. Priority alert. Signal the commander!" The control officer shouted to whomever might be fastest. Naboo loomed into view as they dropped out of hyperspace. Pointed dots of Star Destroyers could be seen surrounding the planet as regular intervals, an Imperial blockade. And there was the Death Star, not even half complete, but still gargantuan in size and menace. It could almost have been a moon, had it not been for its incomplete artificial structuring bared to the stars. "They won't even let anyone escape the genocide," Riken muttered darkly, shaking his head. "May the Force be with us," Akbar answered in prayer from beside him on the bridge of Home One. "This won't be like Alderaan," Riken vowed to himself. He would fight tooth and nail, as would the Alliance, he knew. "All wings report in," he ordered over the fleet-wide comm. "Blue leader, standing by," Sims checked in. "Gray leader, standing by," Solemn checked in. "Green leader, standing by," Krind checked in. Akbar completed his checks of the battleships in the primary division of the Alliance fleet. "All ships proceed in attack formation," he ordered from his control chair. The rebel fleet surged forwards, a multifarious flotilla of numerous battleships and starfighters. Heavily armored bulk cruisers spearheaded a two-pronged attack formation, braced by widening trails of corvettes and frigates with A, B, and Y wings zipping in between. From the far side of the Death Star, 3 Star Destroyers answered their challenge. The arrowhead-shaped ships advanced at full throttle, guns blazing, heedless of being heavily outnumbered by the rebel fleet with any possible backup tied up in the blockade. "I don't like this," Riken muttered as rebel ships began returning fire. Retreat was treason in the Imperial ranks, but such bravery was also rare. Perhaps Palpatine being on board the Death Star had something to do with it. "This is Yamaris," came a call over the comlink from the star cruiser Liberty. "We're sustaining heavy bombardment, but shields are holding. The main concern is that those Star Destroyers are on a direct collision course with the Liberty." "Take road-safe maneuvers and break formation if you must, Admiral," Akbar replied. "All ships intensify forward batteries. Bring those Star Destroyers down." "Gray Squadron, move in," Salm ordered. He led the 3 flights of 4 B-Wings and Y-Wings as they peeled off from the main armada and zigzagged towards the advancing Star Destroyers, avoiding their continuous spray of laser fire. "Focus all firepower on the lead destroyer," Salm said as they neared the firing range. "This is weird, Grey Leader." Telsage said over the comm. Where are the ties? Getting impatient, Lieutenant? Zom smirked. They're all in on Naboo. We'll have plenty to chase soon enough. The Star Destroyers drove in on the lead battleship amidst a shower of battery fire, all laser cannons and proton bombs firing at the starboard shield generator. As they looped around a full circle, the bulbous sphere exploded. Shields at 40%! Sam read off his computer. Aim for the bridge! Before any of the rebel pilots could follow the order, they heard Akbar over the comlink. First squadron, pull back! We almost have this one, Admiral, are you sure? Sam checked. Return to the fleet! Now, Colonel! Gray Squadron began withdrawing, extracting themselves from close combat with the Star Destroyer just as hazardously as when they went in. Increase shields, all eyes on scopes, warned Akbar. We have incoming! Energy readings were off the scale. Seconds later, the black expanse of space all around them became a sea of Star Destroyers as a formidable Imperial armada dropped out of hyperspace. It's a trap!